finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hey everybody, welcome back with us for another week of BS Free MD. We're super glad you're here. And really quickly, I'll just say that this episode is going to be amazing for those of you that are really interested on all the updates and news on the COVID situation. So we've got a special guest to hit that hot topic for you this week. Here we go.
Okay, we are, excited, delighted to have our next guest, who is Josh Guetzkow, who has a Ph.D. in Sociology, and he is coming to us from right next door in Israel. He teaches at the Hebrew University there, and wrote an amazing article right around the 15th, 16th of June about how the CDC, against their actual standard operating procedures, did not look at the vaccine events, the VAERS reports, to look for signals of harm in the vaccine, and just basically ignored it. And so he managed to get a FOIA request and published what they wrote, and it is truly stunning. I mean, it's basically like no one has been looking for signals of harm from the vaccines. And like you've heard numerous times from May and I, when we were working, in a little bit larger city, plus, our continued work with COVID over the last 2 years, we've seen tons and tons of vaccine injury of all different, shapes and sizes. So the fact that, the regulators, the wolf seems to be guarding the hen house. So this should be a very, very interesting episode. So, Dr. Josh, welcome. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, if you could.
Hi, thanks for having me on. A little bit about myself. So I'm a senior lecturer. That's kind of like an associate professor of sociology and criminology at the Hebrew University. I grew up in California, and I did my Ph.D. at Princeton University in sociology. I went on to do a postdoc in health policy at Harvard University. After that, I had a faculty position at the University of Arizona, and then my wife and I moved to Israel. She's Israeli originally, so that precipitated our move. And that's kind of my background in a nutshell. I haven't really done a lot of work in this field prior to COVID. I think that's true for a lot of people who are doing research in the field. And one of the things that sort of got me into this was actually before the pandemic hit. I became aware of some work that was being done by a couple of criminologists and a health communications researcher in Israel, and they were studying the phenomenon of suppression and censorship of scientific research and medical professionals in the field of vaccine science, and in particular the suppression and censorship of research and opinions that called the safety of vaccines into question. So regardless of your opinion about vaccines, are they safe, are they not safe, do they cause harm, do they not cause harm, I found this to be a very interesting phenomenon, both from the perspective of sort of the sociology of science and also from a kind of criminological perspective, the ways in which these scientists who are just mainstream scientists who, did some study and kind of stumbled on some safety problem or what they viewed as maybe a safety problem with vaccines. Not everybody that we talked to eventually in the research that we did falls into that category, but plenty do. And so just to kind of see the ways in which their careers were negatively impacted, and having their papers retracted, and having their the people at their university not allow them to get any grants or tell them they have to stop researching that subject, and all these other just having their names dragged through the mud and stuff like that. So our research just we just talked to these people, we interviewed them about the experiences that they had, and this was all kind of prior to COVID hitting. And what we've seen since is that phenomenon of the suppression of scientific dissent through many different mechanisms has just completely gone off the charts, right? It's really ramped up. It's like it's on steroids. And we have another project, we kind of an extension of that, where we've been interviewing scientists and doctors who kind of go against the flow, the mainstream flow, the COVID orthodoxy. And it could be in many different ways. They challenge the zoonotic origins of the virus, or they challenge the safety of the vaccines, or they want to focus on early treatment. They think that there's good ways to do early treatment, all those kinds of things. And so we interviewed them. Some of the I can't really reveal names, but many of the names I'm sure you're familiar with. So that was kind of part of my journey into this. So when the vaccines rolled out, I was circumspect, and I started looking into reports in the VAERS system, the CDC and FDA's vaccine adverse events reporting system. Also, the European Union has one. It's called Vigilance. The UK has a separate one. It's called the Yellow Card reporting system. I mean, every nation has not every nation, but many nations have their own. And the World Health Organization has one and stuff like that. So I started looking into some of those, and kind of began seeing very worrying signs of what I thought were safety signals. At the time, I wasn't familiar with the literature on pharmacovigilance. I could kind of see with my eyes what was happening. But I didn't kind of have the tools at that time to measure it and say, okay, there's something wrong here and I can prove it. It took a few months, and I was just preparing for a presentation that I gave, and then I came across some papers about how do you detect safety signals out of these types of reporting systems, right? As you mentioned, one of the problems with these systems is that they're voluntary, so and they're open, so pretty much anybody can report something, which isn't really a bad. I mean, actually, they want everybody to report. The whole point, the whole reason for these systems is to detect early warning signals, right? Safety signals, and if people aren't reporting, then it's a problem. They want to kind of increase the rate of reporting, and in fact, as part of the legal arrangement around COVID vaccines, medical professionals were required by law to report certain adverse events if they received any. I'm curious, were you two ever notified or made aware in any way that you were required to report an adverse event of like death or anaphylaxis, for example? Those are two that you're required to report.
Not that I recall.
I would say no, not professionally.
Yeah.
Although on social channels, I would write things, and people, then would say,
Well, plus
you have to by law, and therefore, since it's not being reported by all your colleagues, it doesn't exist.
Well, I think May actually
Yeah, exactly.
May actually interacted with VAERS, and it's arduous to say the least. Plus, it puts in there, we will punish you by law, blah blah blah, if you falsely declare,
right.
Your children will be taken from you,
right.
Will
and I think
be put in a
right. I mean, it's a federal offense to file a false report, and I believe from what I had heard that they've only been able to prove 2 false reports, and one of those was actually submitted by a guy who, contrary to federal law, was trying to prove that anybody could just go and put in a fake report. And the whole idea is absurd, because first of all, until pretty recently, the CDC, people from the CDC and FDA, right? It's their system. Okay, they never said anything about false reporting. They never had a problem with it, and in fact, they've published numerous papers in some of the best journals, JAMA and Lancet Infectious Diseases, using the VAERS data, right? So if it's fraudulent, if there's a problem with it, first of all, it's their problem and they need to fix it. Second of all, if it's so problematic, how are they able to publish all of these papers in these best journals using this, fraudulent data or whatever? So that whole argument just doesn't wash. Yeah, there may be some fraudulent reports on the margins, maybe, but apparently it's not stopping, the CDC and the FDA from publishing papers using the data. Scott McLaughlin, I don't think I pronounced that name right. Scott McLaughlin did a study. He's a researcher at the UK. He did a very thorough study on a subset of VAERS reports on deaths, and he found that 2/3 of the reports had many indications that it was filed by a medical professional, not by just a random person. The CDC has determined that upwards of 80% or more of the reports on myocarditis, which they've studied thoroughly, are what they would consider to be true cases of myocarditis. They didn't say that the rest were not, were fraudulent or mistaken or whatever. They just said we can rest assured that these 20% are legitimate cases of myocarditis, and then they write about it and they publish papers. So the cases of the reports of myocarditis are believable, but none of the others are. So it just doesn't wash.
So tell us about the June 16th article and the FOIA request, and kind of walk us through what the CDC was supposed to do as far as looking for signals of harm, which is they're supposed to be the disease detectives of the United States, and de facto, in a lot of respects, have become kind of the disease detectives of the world.
Yeah. Right.
And I think Team America World Police. So without the puppets. No, actually, with more puppets. With more puppets. Yes. And so talk to us about that and how you came up with that idea, and then what their response was.
Okay, so I'm going to rewind because I kind of got off track a little bit. So when I started this, I didn't know how to detect safety signals, and then I found some papers by authors of the CDC about how you go about detecting safety signals. Okay, there's a very established methodology, right? So anybody who comes and says, so one thing you hear oftenly is like you say, well, there's this huge increase in the number of reports, and people say, well, there's a huge increase in the number of vaccines being given out. So yeah, of course you'd expect a huge increase, right? But that's like, it's such a dismissive sort of attitude. It's like, we should be concerned about the data that's coming in, and it's that's a hypothesis. It's not a, you can dismiss it and say, no, it's just because of the vaccines, but actually it's not a scientific attitude at all, because really what you're offering is a hypothetical explanation for what you're seeing, but it's a hypothesis that can be tested, right? And so you see this all the time, people dismissing things for these types of reasons. So I've looked. You can peg it to the number of vaccines doses that are being given out, and you still see this enormous increase per million vaccine doses that are being given out. Say you compare. What I did mainly was I compared COVID vaccines to flu vaccines, because flu vaccines, first of all, we give like 160 million flu vaccines pretty much every year in the U.S. in the last decade. So there's a lot, and they're given to all age ranges, just like the COVID vaccines, sort of, right? So you can kind of look at different age brackets and stuff like that. And you can see that there's just a huge, per million doses, it's huge. Huge increases in all different types of events. Now, so there's two issues here. So how do you detect a safety signal from this type of data? Am I going into too deep in the weeds? Is this not?
No, this is perfect.
Okay. No, this is perfect. We have a physician and non-physician audience, so having people understand kind of at a granular level what it looks like is, I think, really important, and it's helpful for us too, because it gives us tools to explain to other people.
Okay.
Because we all get stuck in this correlation equals causation kind of
Right.
thing, you know? And so how do you, I mean, a lot of this is really how do you do science, which is you
Right.
start with a hypothesis. Well, you start with a hypothesis for a reason. Wow, there appears to be a whole bunch of myocarditis cases in young males. That doesn't make sense. Well, what is it? Is it the vaccine? Is it sunshine? Is it lack of vitamin D?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, throw out whatever you want, test it, and see what makes the most sense.
Right.
And you know, we've lost a lot of that. And then of course it becomes politicized, and then it's completely flushed down the drain at that stage.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate. So okay, so the classic, the kind of basic tool of pharmacovigilance is, so what do we don't, in most cases we don't know how many pills were given out or vaccines were given out. All we know are how many reports we got of this particular medicine or this particular vaccine. So what they do is they do this thing called proportional reporting ratio, PRR. And basically what you do is you say, okay, here's a new vaccine or a new medicine. I'm going to go with vaccines, but you can use it for anything, okay? Here's this new vaccine. Now we're getting, out of all of the reports that we've got, let's say 6% of them are for Guillain-Barré syndrome, okay, out of all the reports that we got. Now let's take a vaccine that we know. Let's take a flu vaccine. Let's take some other established vaccine. What percent of the reports for that old vaccine are for Guillain-Barré syndrome? So if it's 3% and you're getting 6 or 10% in the new vaccine, okay, so that means that for that particular adverse event, there's a higher proportion, okay? You compare those two. So if the comparison between those two becomes high enough, okay, if the difference is big enough, then you say, oh, we've got a safety signal. Okay, so we're getting a higher proportion of reports for this new thing than we've been getting for the old one. So let's look into it. Okay, that's what these systems are designed for, the early warning systems, right? And you can go another step. You can say, well, with these vaccines, we know how many doses are being administered, and we can compare that to the number. You know, we can peg the number of reports that we're getting per million vaccine doses administered, and we can compare that to how many reports we get per million flu vaccines we've administered. And if you do that, you find that the safety signals are off the charts. Okay, either PRRs or this other way, or any way you slice or dice the data, they're just off the charts. Okay, and then you get to this argument. The argument that you get to after that is people will say, well, that's just because people are so afraid of the vaccines. They're anxious. They're hearing all of this stuff from anti-vaxxers. The law says you have to report these things. All this kind of stuff, okay? And that's why you're getting much higher reporting rates for the COVID vaccines. And that's the term for that in the literature is stimulated reporting, okay? So how would you go about deciding if this increase is stimulated reporting or an actual safety signal? And the way you do that is you compare the proportion of reports for different types of events to previous vaccines. So if people were off their rocker and just reporting every last thing that happened to them. And by the way, this is established CDC methodology. They wrote a paper in 2010 on the H1N1 vaccines, trying to assess whether because there was an increase in VAERS reporting for the H1N1 vaccines, and they said, well, is this stimulated reporting or is this an actual safety signal? In that paper, they concluded that it was not a safety signal, that it was just stimulated reporting. I sort of disagree with the conclusions they reached in that paper, but anyway, they have an established methodology to check this out, right? So I used that methodology. I applied it to the VAERS data, comparing to the flu vaccines. And here's the idea. If it's stimulated reporting, then you would expect to see a similar increase across the board, across every adverse event you'd expect. So like if there's a 20% increase in one type of reporting of one type of adverse event, you'd expect to see 20% across all different types of adverse events. But if you're seeing different increases across different types of events, and that's what we see when we look at the data, then that's a sign that it's not stimulated reporting. It's really a genuine safety signal. Okay? And that's what we see, and it's clear as day. You cannot miss it. Okay? So I'm like, okay, you can't miss this. How are they missing this? What's going on here? So I talked to I published this article in the Children's Health Defense online newspaper, The Defender. Okay? And I talked to them, and I said, why don't we submit a FOIA request asking the CDC? Because, okay, here's the deal. In January 2021, the CDC put up, late January 2021, there's a document on the CDC website. They have a web page where they go through and they tell you all of the different things that they're going to be doing to check the safety of the vaccines. Okay? They have many different methods and many different data sets. The one thing that they said, they have one document for VAERS. How are we going to go about examining VAERS for safety signals? And VAERS is very important because it's the first line of defense. It's the early warning system. All the other stuff takes months and months. VAERS, you can, in a few weeks, you can start to see safety signals, right? So they said, we're going to do all of these different things to look for safety signals, including calculating PRRs, the proportional reporting ratios. Okay, you can pump out numbers all day long, right? And they said we're going to have these 8 different types of tables of different, the numbers of different adverse events. But the numbers are numbers. If you're not doing the PRR analysis, you can't detect the safety signal. You must do that in order to detect the safety signal. Okay, so after I wrote this article, I said, okay, let's see. They have this standard operating procedure which says every week they're going to be printing out these 8+ different tables with all of this information, including a calculation of proportional reporting ratios, they give some examples of what vaccines they might compare it to. Okay, so let's see what you got. Now, it took a while, and we'll go into all of those details, but eventually in June, I think it was June 16th or 17th, we finally got an answer, and and it turned out that they didn't once calculate a proportional reporting ratio. In fact, they said that's not our job. We've never done it. It's not, and this data mining is not our job, even though in their standard operating procedures document, they say very clearly, the CDC will engage in data mining using, proportional reporting ratios. Okay. So it's clear as day what they said they were going to do, and they didn't do it. And there were a bunch of other stuff that they didn't do also. I could talk about that too, but that's the key, because that's how you detect safety signals. If you're not doing that, you cannot detect safety signals. And yet, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so who does it normally for flu vaccines or chickenpox or varicella? I mean, measles. Who does that?
Well, they're
normally?
Supposed to, right? Well, so okay.
Is it?
So there's another data mining technique. They call it Bayesian data mining, and in their standard operating procedure, briefing document that they posted, they said the FDA was going to do the Bayesian data mining. So the FDA presumably might be also doing some type of oversight. We are going to be filing a FOIA with them very soon. I can talk about, there is some indication that they have been doing it, because they have a preprint up from a few weeks ago that's co-authored by FDA and CDC staffers, where they're looking at death reports to VAERS. And it's a very problematic study, because what they do is they say, okay, here are the deaths that are reported to VAERS. Now let's look at how many deaths occurred within 1 week of vaccination, and now let's look how many deaths, and they look at different age groups or whatever, and they say how many deaths occur in that age group in a given week in the U.S. And they say, oh, well, that number is this. They call that the background rate of death. Okay. They said, well, that number is so much bigger than what we're seeing in VAERS, so obviously there's no problem. Okay, well, right, okay, you're right. I can see your face. You're like, what? It makes no sense. It makes no sense for many reasons, and the most important one is we know that VAERS is underreported. right? That's just a fact, and they admit it, and they've admitted in different types of ways. They've even admitted to underreporting of like myocarditis events of like 6 times underreporting or something like that. This is stuff that they've presented at different committees and stuff like that. We it's almost certainly much more than that. Um, but um, but if the deaths are underreported and you're comparing to the background rate of death, but you haven't figured out what the underreporting factor is, then the comparison makes no sense. It just simply makes
Well, and there's other signals, like there's other places to look,
sure.
right?
Yes.
Like when you look at insurance companies, I mean, insurance companies that sell life insurance, their actuarial data on death is as bulletproof as it's going to get because they're multi-billion-dollar companies. And what was it? Is it in Missouri or something? The first insurance company, they said they had like a 30% change, a 30% increase in all-cause mortality
that was
in men
Indiana.
under 50 or something.
Yeah, and
I mean,
there's more of that coming out. There's like
staggering.
a British company, I think, that's recently reported something like that. It's bad. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's many more signals. But the reason I mentioned that paper was because they also said in that paper that they did this Bayesian data mining on death. But the methodology and the comparison that they're making is so poorly explained in the paper that I actually have no idea what they actually did. So I don't know. But apparently, it seems like the FDA is doing something, and we'll find out what that is. But the point is, I mean, that doesn't change the fact that the CDC basically promised. They said we're going to do X, and they didn't do it. Right? They just didn't. They didn't check it.
Which is wild because, in a I don't know, a few shows back, when we interviewed Sasha Latipova, May gets after me because I need to say her name correctly. And she had run pharma subcontracting companies that would do the studies and then present the data to the FDA and so forth. So she knew, she was intimate with the interworkings of how the system is supposed to work.
Mm.
And she's like, they didn't do any of the safety studies, and most specifically, they didn't do safety studies on the entire vaccine, and then they would do a study on one agent, and then they would change the final product and not restudy it. Like, just really weird, kind of shoddy science. And the thing that was so crazy is, so Pfizer does this, and the FDA looks the other way, and then when the FOIA requests were going through and they were being defended. So the lawyers working on behalf of Pfizer were FDA lawyers.
Oh, really?
So,
I heard the other way around, that Pfizer stepped in to defend the FDA, but I didn't realize FDA was.
No, it was government people. And so you sit there and you go,
Oh my God.
like, just like I have become 100% convinced that, especially with the baby vaccine, vaccinating the youngest of the 6 months to 5 years, I'm convinced that at this point they know that they have made a catastrophic error, and the best way to cover your tracks is to get rid of the control group. And they don't want a control group where in 10 years from now you have children that were never vaccinated because they were 6 months old at the time, and all of a sudden some other signals crop up in these 20-year-olds that were 10 now, and they're like, well, what was the only thing that was different?
Right.
And I'm convinced of it because they got an emergency use authorization for a cohort of people where COVID was never an emergency. That alone on its face is crazy.
Right.
Secondly, there's no long-term data, so the people you have to protect the most are the ones with the longest period of time to accrue risk, i.e. children.
Right.
And then, when you look at the original Pfizer data itself, they excluded the sickest people, which were the only people that should have been vaccinated in the first place.
Right.
So then you sit there and you go, okay, not only did they have shoddy science to begin with, they haven't even been looking for harm.
Right.
Which is,
and when they find it,
at a minimum,
it's interesting what you say about the baby data, because they did that right with all of the cohorts. I mean, do you know what the average time was between first vaccination, okay, so in the adult trial, they say, well, we gave the placebo group an opportunity to get vaccinated some point later in the study. Do you guys have a sense of how long it took them before they vaccinated the placebo group in the adult study?
I think it was less than 6 months.
It was.
As
The
I
average
recall.
is like 120. I've been analyzing the data that's been released, and it's like 127 days, like 4.5 months is the average, number of days between the first vaccination when you got a placebo and when you actually, well, no, actually that's not entirely true. It was before you were unblinded, but most people were vaccinated within like a week of unblinding. So yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. It's less
No,
than 6 months.
they wanted to burn the blinded portion of this and get rid of the placebo
Yeah.
group as fast as they could, because I think early on they knew that this was a potential total loser.
Yeah. Have you guys heard the story of Augusto Roux?
No.
Okay. You know about Maddie Daguerre, right? Maddie. Okay, so let me tell you. Okay, I mean, if you guys don't know, your listeners probably may not know. So I'll start with Maddie Daguerre. Okay, Maddie Daguerre was a 12-year-old girl lived in Ohio, and she and her siblings volunteered for the Pfizer 12 to 17-year-old trial. Within 24 hours of her second vaccination, she developed some neurological problems. She went to the hospital. And it's a very long story, and I'm going to cut it short. Basically, she's in a wheelchair. She's a paraplegic on her way to being a quadriplegic. She has to eat through a feeding tube. She has horrible neurological pain and a million other different ailments. Her life has just been completely shattered. And it's clear as day that this is a result of her participation in the trial. She did get the vaccine, and she was not in the placebo group. And Pfizer has basically denied that it's related. I don't actually think that Pfizer has ever come out and said that, but the trial coordinator said it wasn't related. Her parents have all kinds of documentation, and they've had other doctors like Dr. McCulloch say this is definitely related to the vaccine. It's obvious. And they've notified the FDA, they've notified the NIH. The NIH at first was talking to them and then just cut off ties. They've contacted Pfizer, right? And they've just basically been completely ignored. So what here's the kicker is that Pfizer didn't detail her adverse events correctly in their reports, both also to the New England Journal of Medicine when they published the paper. She's listed as having like functional abdominal pain or something like that. Okay, so it's just they just completely ignored everything that happened to her. They wrote something down that sounds very benign, relatively benign, and that's it. And she was thrown in the trash bin basically. She hasn't gotten any help or any compensation or anything like that. So then she's been fighting. She and her mom have really been fighting to get recognition of what happened to her. Now, there's another guy. There's a guy named Augusto Roux. Augusto Roux is an Argentinian, and he was a participant in the Buenos Aires site of the Pfizer adult trial. The Argentine Buenos Aires site was by far the largest site in the Pfizer trial, had about 5,000 participants. And he basically, on the cab ride home from his second shot, he started feeling unwell. He started getting a fever, and I don't know. This is all detailed, but within a couple of days, I mean, he was feeling extremely unwell and getting worse and worse. He fainted, and then eventually he ended up in the hospital like 2 days later. And he was diagnosed essentially with pericarditis. He had some other problems, but basically that was the main issue. This is the inflammation around the you guys know this, but the inflammation around the lining of the heart. And he called the trial coordinators while he was in the hospital, and he said, "This is what I've got." And by the way, the doctor at the hospital that was treating him said, it's written in his record that it was due to the vaccination. Okay, and nurses that he spoke to at the, or at least one nurse at the hospital said that because they enrolled like over 4,000 people in August over the course of like 3 weeks in Argentina. And she said they've been seeing hundreds of people coming in from this trial. Okay. So he goes in, he's got pericarditis. He calls up the trial site. He's like, this is what I've got. They wrote, and this is, you can see this in the records. He's a lawyer. I mean, they messed with the wrong guy. Let me tell you, there's a lot more that's going to come out about this. But he sued them for all of the medical records from the trial and from the hospital. And you can see that they wrote down that he had like pneumonia. Okay, that's what they wrote down when he called them. He said, I'm in here with, I've got this heart inflammation, and they wrote down pneumonia. And then a few weeks later, Pfizer called the trial site people, the people running the trial, and they said, can you change this to suspected COVID? Even though he had a PCR test when he was admitted to the hospital that came out negative. So they knew that he didn't have COVID, right? But they're basically saying, what they're basically doing is they're asking to change it to a kind of let's say they were sweeping it under the carpet, okay? Because suspected COVID wasn't enough to be counted as an actual COVID case in terms of the efficacy of the vaccine. Because you had to have like symptoms and a positive PCR test. So here they said, well, he has these symptoms. We're going to call it suspected COVID. Well, if you have suspected COVID after you get the vaccination, who's going to think that it's related to the vaccine? You know, it's sort of like, well, you had the sniffles, maybe it was COVID. You know, it's like, it's this very kind of generic sort of thing. So they've just completely, erased. And it gets even worse than that, because the doctor that was involved, the head doctor at the trial, kind of retroactively changed his clinical records to say that he had been diagnosed, or that he had some like severe anxiety, like a mental health issue, even though he had never been diagnosed with that, and the doctor is not allowed to just say he has anxiety. You have to have an actual diagnosis, and there are reasons why he did that, because it allowed him to play whatever. I won't go into all the details, but I mean, basically what you're seeing is like this pattern of like these adverse events that are very serious, that are just being ignored, papered over.
So
That's frightening on that level. I mean, we've seen it over and over in colleagues and where we've worked, and with reports from other colleagues when we're working in clinic, all the way from people having miscarriages with a correlation of having had the vaccine within less than 4 weeks, and OBs just, I think it frightens me that they want to believe in something so much that they just refuse to even deny that there could be a correlation, or even like, well, maybe not, but let's report it and see what the data is,
right.
like nationally or internationally.
You have to report it. And many people think, well, no, I only have to report it if I think it's related. No, you have to report it. It's not up to you to make that decision. It's up to you to report it. And it's up to presumably up to the CDC to look at the data and tell you if there's if we're seeing a safety signal, and then they have other means they can go through and look at it more thoroughly. But they just completely, dropped the ball. So,
as soon as you said the word, Argentina, I was just sitting there, and my mind goes down to the fact, okay, Pfizer, German company. Germans misbehaving in Argentina. When has that ever happened before?
Well, interestingly, the doctor in charge of the trial in Argentina is Jewish.
But Israel, I mean, you live in Israel. Israel, exclusively got the Pfizer vaccine.
Yes.
And I'm like, I mean, the irony, unfortunately, is rich, and most people don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm like, a German drug company experimenting.
I guess
never been bad before, has it?
They're forgiving 70 times 7.
I guess.
Apparently,
I guess
apparently
so,
they are.
I mean, it's crazy. And now Albert Bourla is in Israel right now, receiving like the Israel's Nobel Prize, the Genesis Prize, and everybody's just fawning over him. It's like the savior. It's like the Messiah has come back to the promised land or something. It's really. nauseating,
Wow.
frankly.
It's like giving it to Rudolf Hess.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I mean, it's just
It's yeah. So yeah, well now, I mean, it seems there's some early indications now that there's a big drop in fertility in the first quarter of 2020, or the first few months of 2020. There's some noise on Twitter. People are assembling data from different countries. Some countries are okay. They're seeing big drops, and it's a little bit concerning, to be honest. But it's a little early to say. It's a little bit early to say. But I did an analysis of some FOIA data that we got from an Israeli hospital in Haifa, where we got data on miscarriages, stillbirths, and abortions among vaccinated women and among unvaccinated women. And there was some concerning stuff there. I mean, it's data. It's not the best data, and this is one of the things that really frustrates me as a social scientist who's had extensive training in statistics and methodology and stuff like that. Is that we'll never get the best data. Never get the the data. They'll never give us access to the data that can really make the point in a totally unassailable way. So we're left kind of like with the table scraps of data. We're doing the best that we can. That's why I think we put so much emphasis on VAERS, because that's what we have access to. But this other data, we can't distinguish miscarriages from stillbirths from abortions. We just have them all lumped into this one category. We don't have any other information about these women, so we can't do any kind of statistical controls for confounders or whatever. But you look at it and you're like, you see so they started allowing women to get vaccinated, encouraging women to get vaccinated in February 2021, and you see already in May, there's this huge difference in the number of these stillbirth abortions and miscarriages among the vaccinated women compared to the unvaccinated women. There weren't the number isn't very large at that point. But then you see, and then the signal kind of goes away, and they kind of start to converge again. And then later when you get to the booster months, you see they start to diverge again, and you see this kind of increase among the vaccinated women. So, and then I was contacted by the head of the maternity ward at that hospital. Somebody had gotten wind of this article I had written, and or somebody had written about my article, and he was angry. He was upset. He was like, you're just fake news or whatever. But
You're spreading misinformation.
Something like that, right? He's like,
Yeah,
who are you to, you don't are trained in any of this. You don't know what you're talking about. That was kind of his attitude. So I talked to him on the phone, and by the end of the conversation, he was convinced that we were on the same side of the issue, and that there really was a reason to be, if not concerned, at least to look into it further. And he said he would look into it further and gather more information. I haven't heard from him. It's been a few months. I don't think I will hear from him. I'm not sure he'll actually do it, but at least I convinced him that there was something worth looking at.
Well, and this is the kind of conversations that need to have, because, I love that you're a PhD in sociology and you look at things in a completely different way than we do. I mean, that's the only way you're going to get to any kind of truth in any of this.
I mean, it takes the emotional aspect out of it, because in the doctor-patient relationship, I think there is emotional aspect, but also, what else was I going to say? But if you're sort of an outsider with no doctor-patient relationship, and you're looking at hard facts, then, I mean, and you have nothing to gain either way.
Well, plus
out of it.
Plus the other thing is, and people really kind of forget this, is that physicians, all the way back to when we were barbers, we're tradesmen. Okay, we are trades. I'm sorry, we are trades.
I say I'm a highly skilled monkey.
We are trades people. Okay, we are trained using science to do a trade, to diagnose and treat disease,
right,
much like a mechanic would diagnose and treat a problem with a vehicle.
Right.
And so we need people on the outside. So it's just like I have a good friend who owns a plumbing company, and he's a super good plumber, and he can tell you all about the new materials that won't ever break if your house freezes, but he doesn't know how to make those things, because you need the sciencey guy with special labs to make the new pipes, right? And
right.
so sometimes in medicine we get so arrogant. It's like we think we know all the science part when we're actually pretty crappy scientists. Largely, we can be tremendous clinicians, very good detectives
Right.
at figuring stuff out, but that doesn't mean we get the basic science. And
Right.
so it's why listening to you and listening to MDs that are actual scientists, like Malone
Mm-hmm.
and one of my personal favorites, Harvey Risch.
Yeah,
He's
Harvey
a
is great. He's very,
he
very
has
smart.
such a jaundiced eye when he looks at data,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
then Peter, who's still seeing patients, and so he has that intensity of boots on the ground. But what
Mm-hmm.
are we doing that works? And we got to do
Right.
something. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, but but as soon as I hear somebody say, well, no, you just have to believe it because these organizations have always been honest, and then I'm like, and you obviously have never read a single history book
Right.
ever in your
Right.
entire life.
Right. I mean, people, I don't think anyone's ever said to my face, "You're a conspiracy theorist," but I've been, I'm espousing views that are routinely condemned as conspiracy theories, and I want to know. Well, wait, what was my conspiracy theory that you think that I said? Because I never, kind of came out and said anything. I've said that the regulatory agencies have been captured, but that's not conspiracy theory. That's political science. I mean, there's decades of research and writing in political science and other fields, public policy on regulatory capture. That's not fantasy and that's not theory. It's a fact. If it's a fact that it's actually happening right now, we could argue about, but you can't just dismiss it because you think it's crazy. I mean, it happens, and it has happened and will happen again, and it's obvious to anybody who's looking at this with sober eyes that it's happening now. You just can't explain what the FDA has been approving without thinking that there has to be some kind of capture going on here. I mean, it's just the data and they're not they're all these studies are not kind of reaching any standard that has ever been used in the past for even an emergency use authorization, right? The child trial didn't do it, this toddler trial didn't do it, and yet they're approving these medications. It's complete, yeah, it's really absurd. And then you talk about these companies, right? So the companies are, as a criminologist, we would call them career criminals. Frankly, I would call them super predators. Where you've got Pfizer that's paid out like $10 billion in the last 20 years in civil and criminal penalties, engaged in all kinds of fraud. Right? I bring up the example from the late 80s, I think it was. They had subsidiary was making these artificial heart valves, and at some point the company realized that there was some kind of manufacturing defect or something with the valves that made them fail early, and it withheld that information from the FDA, withheld that information from the customers who had received it, and then eventually, I don't remember exactly how it played out, but eventually it came to light that this is what had happened, and they had to pay all these fines and stuff like that, and they took the product off the market. They still didn't notify the people that had them, and so they have no problem, right? Johnson and Johnson hiding the fact that they'd known since the 70s that there was asbestos in baby powder, talcum powder, that they were having moms put on their babies' butts for decades, knowing that there was this carcinogen in the talcum powder, and they did nothing. They hid it, right? So they absolutely cannot be trusted, right? If you had a babysitter that added asbestos to the baby powder and put it on your baby's bum, would you ever, well, first of all, you'd want her in jail, and you certainly would never hire her again. And you would tell all your friends not to hire her, and yet we have these criminal organizations, these career criminals, who are just like it. I don't know. It's like we have this like amnesia or something. It's just incredible where we're like, oh yeah, welcome, come and sit at the table. Here, let's give you billions of dollars to develop the next generation of vaccines or
I know.
whatever, and
Like pay a fine and go
right,
ahead and do your business again. Like
yeah,
that
No,
makes no sense. It's like, when does it get to the point where you
right.
just keep getting to continue to pay fines that obviously don't cripple your
right,
company because
right. It's just a
you don't
cost of
care, you
doing
roll over, you
business. They know that.
Yeah.
No, it's exactly. It's Pablo Escobar sending every single person in the barrios of Medellin to college so that they never squeal on where his guys are.
Exactly.
It's like, you want a nice house on a college education? Yeah, okay. Shut
Yeah.
up. All right, perfect.
Right.
I mean, that's what it is. But it's, and it brings to, the bigger the crime, the easier it is to hide sometimes. It drives me
Yeah.
crazy. There's a great line in a Megadeth song, and it says, kill one person, you're a murderer. Kill 10, you're a monster. Kill 100,000, you're a conqueror. Kill them all, you're God.
Oh my
And there's,
gosh. Yeah.
and there's, and there is that kind of
Right.
thing. Like, the monstrosity of this is so hard to comprehend
Right.
that it's easier to ignore.
Right.
Whereas if a
Mhm.
local pharmacy had a local pharmacist that poisoned prescriptions for his own demented jollies, that would be a national story. And it would be we'd follow the court case for the next however long, and the trial, and the going to jail, and the perp walk, and everything would be like, made for TV
O.J.
movie.
Simpson all over
And it would
again.
be one guy
Mhm.
poisoning 10 people, right?
Right.
And that would be, I mean, it's horrific.
Right.
I get it. But if you're a multinational corporation with billions of dollars, you can poison billions of people and you can get away with it.
Yep.
And vaccines aside, COVID aside,
Right.
that's been going on for generations.
Yeah. It has. There's another quotation. So the communications researcher named Marshall McLuhan, who says that only the small secrets need to be protected. The large ones are kept secret by public incredulity. Right? Or I think Hitler had a similar type of quote, like the big lie. You don't have to bother trying to hide the big lie because nobody will believe it because it's just too kind of like. And it's interesting because I think when you start to talk about these kinds of things with people, there's almost this like immediate emotional reaction where it's sort of like they kind of intuitively understand that if they accept what you're saying, then it has all of these implications that lead somewhere that's so difficult and so unpleasant. I think it's almost on an unconscious level that they don't even kind of think it through, but unconsciously they realize that if this is true, then it's just too uncomfortable. It's too difficult. It's too hard to accept.
I just start to think, because this happens, because you can't even engage anymore in discussions with people with opposite thinking, like you would normally in universities or
Right.
as a professional or as a scientist, to challenge hypotheses without getting canceled or name called now or whatever. And so I think it comes down to almost to the core of what people believe internally, like even that if they're wrong, like as to go to what you're saying, then if their theory is wrong or what they've been following, then it reflects on them,
Yeah.
and then they're the bad person, or that
Right.
is their belief system. And if that fails, their whole belief system crumbles, and
Yeah. Well,
then what do they have?
Right. No, I think the most practical example of this, because virtually all of us have seen this in one way, shape, or form, is how come it, you meet friends that have been divorced before because they had an unfaithful spouse, and they're always the last to know. It's like, no, dude, you weren't the last to know. You're the last to not look at the signs of somebody never coming home, or your husband coming home smelling like another woman drunk, to put two and two together and
Right.
realize, maybe something's not right in our marriage.
Yeah.
It's but confronting that and going, if this is really true, my marriage is
Right.
over, is so horrific
So hard. Yeah.
that you just
don't.
kind of
Right.
keep going along
Willing to
with
tell you and kind of keep lying to yourself. It's interesting what you said about kind of how our beliefs kind of reflect on us. In social psychology, there's this idea of like social identity, right? This idea that my sense of myself is tied up into my sense of my belonging to a group, and in many cases, my sense of my my group identity, my social identity, is tied to my belief system. So, and this is especially true when you start to think about the way in which these issues are tied into partisanship in the U.S., especially the political polarization that I grew up a Democrat, a left wing. My parents are dyed in the wool liberals, and you try to talk with them about this, and they immediately think, wait, this is like Trump Republican stuff. This isn't, and so, and then that just makes them angry, and it's like, oh yeah, you're so, what are you listening to Trump or whatever, and
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
well,
I mean, it all boils down to that.
But
As
it
soon
doesn't
as
make
you're pick, it's funny.
but this is why I love talking to folks like you, because, like, I mean, politically we're very right. I mean, we're the rural white Christian Republicans,
right,
but there's principles that are so much bigger than fiscal
oh yeah,
policy and a bunch of like the truth, like fairness, like regulatory
yep,
agencies that actually give a crap about the
yep,
country. Like that should so totally transcend politics that it doesn't matter.
right,
I mean, the liberals used to be the ones that didn't trust
right,
corporations. Now they're in bed with them. Like,
right,
how did that happen?
right. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. And my dad's a doctor, by the way, but my parents are pretty distrustful of pharmaceutical companies, and they know about all of the opioid crisis being fueled by the dishonesty of the pharmaceuticals and all of that kind of stuff. And yet, this thing about vaccines. But what I was saying earlier was that, our sense, like, if our beliefs are tied up into a sense of who we are, right? So as humans, we kind of strive for positive self-image, and so if my beliefs are tied up in a sense of my kind of superiority in a way, right? I'm a good person because I believe X, Y, and Z. If it turns out that those beliefs are wrong, then what does it mean about me as a person? It really kind of gets into this deep sense of who I am. So I think that was a really, it's a very astute observation that you made. It's interesting though, in Israel there
Well,
isn't this partisan. You don't have this partisan divide. It's like everybody, all of the parties are on the same side, are on the same, following the same line. It's just kind of us fringe, and we're not, we're not so fringe, but basically anybody who's, not on the vaccine bandwagon is a dangerous anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist. Even if they're, we have like there's a group of scientists and professionals in Israel, who came together to offer alternative ideas about how to deal with the pandemic and stuff. And these are very, very esteemed scientists and scholars. And even though, they have this group, they're still, this totally marginalized, um, dismissed, etc., denigrated.
yeah, and I guess the thing that's really interesting, and maybe we could be flying this plane for a long time, um, is everything, every advance especially if you just leave it in science, every advance in science always it was a conspiracy theory or crazy initially.
Right.
You know, Galileo couldn't get the people in the academy to look through the telescope because if they did and they actually saw what he saw and he could prove that, the Earth was not the center of the universe, then they had no careers. Einstein for years, even though he had written the theory of relativity down and he thought he had the good math, but of course he didn't have the proof because they didn't have, linear accelerators and all this kind of stuff then. He backed away from peer pressure and he said, no, I think, there's a fudge. He added a fudge factor, a constant to kind of discredit his own theories until later when the political kind of mood changed in science. And he goes, yeah, no, I was right all along. And so, I mean, sociology is probably the most epic place to discuss these things because that's really where this starts and ends. We're all tribal. That's the way humans are.
Mm-hmm.
We all need to be in a tribe, but we also need to be guided by principles bigger than just having the tribe win.
Right. And I think,
because if one tribe wins, then, it's sort of the eye for an eye. If it's an eye for an eye, there's a lot of blind people.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually there has to be bigger principles of forgiveness, principles of reaching out,
Right.
moderation,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because without that, we're just going to club each other
Right.
to death to no
Right.
end of that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really where sociology falls short, because it is a science. It is empirical. It's not normative, or it's not supposed to be normative anyway. And so, we don't have, good guidance on what those principles should be, unfortunately, in my opinion. Philosophy may be
Well,
um,
I think
various
ultimately
things.
they're religious principles, really. I mean, that's because I was thinking about this yesterday. Human beings are incorrigibly religious, and if they don't ascribe to a formal religion, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, whatever, they'll make one up.
Right.
And I think that when you look at what I call scientism and the follow the science, and kind of the priestliness of Fauci, and even though there's open contradictions in statements that these guys make, and obvious signals of harm from the vaccines, it's like I can't be an apostate
Right.
because I got to stay in the church of scientism or whatever,
Right.
and that's what we see is
Right.
it's just like,
And you'll be excommunicated if you step out of line, if you challenge the orthodoxy, your heterodox views.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you'll be
We know all
excommunicated
about
way
that.
faster than most
Yeah.
churches.
We know all about that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I've been kind of fortunate. I have not yet been the target of much of any of that, and I think it's because I actually think it's because I'm a sociologist and a criminologist. I think viewed as sort of harmless. People aren't really going to listen to me because, well, what do I know? And I've seen that. I've seen people kind of be very dismissive of me, and well, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But I will say, and this was, maybe we'll come back to where we started, this whole thing with the FOIA request and stuff like that. So I just learned yesterday that last week, Senator Ron Johnson wrote a letter to the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, citing my article extensively and saying, why didn't you? I want to know why you didn't do the analyses that you. Well, first of all, he repeated my request. He said, "Show us what you did." He said, "If you indeed didn't do this analysis, I want to know why and who made the decision." So now I expect she'll ignore him, because she's been ignoring him. The bureaucratic establishment has been ignoring him, sort of systematically. But it'll be interesting to see if she does respond, and what that response is. I expect
Don't
she'll.
hold your breath.
What? I won't hold my breath. I'm not.
I said,
Don't worry.
yeah, don't hold your breath.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
Exactly. You're going to be a really good synchronized swimmer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Breath hold diving. Oh, you're close to the Red Sea. There's good
Right.
There you
diving.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's just we'll see. I have a feeling there's a lot of cracks that are forming, and it's kind of one of these things where there's little cracks in the dam, you can't notice it, and then all of a sudden, once it
It
breaks,
weakens
Well,
and
people are,
boom.
people are voting with their feet. If you look at, or with their arms, in a sense, right? Initially people rolled up their sleeves. Now they're rolling their sleeves back down and they're walking out, because if you look at Israel, there's a pretty high vaccine uptake among adults who were offered it, and among the teenagers. But then by the third dose, the first booster, you start to see a drop off, and then by the fourth dose, you've got like, they first offered it to 65 plus, and you had like maybe half of them got the fourth dose, and almost very, very few of the younger ones. And the child vaccine, I think, has a pickup of maybe at most 20% in Israel. And I'm guessing the really young children one will be even less. And in terms of they also started a booster for kids in Israel, and that had like 100, maybe 300 kids tops showed up for that so far. So people, frankly, I think people are starting to connect the dots, and they themselves, or people they know, have been injured. I did this. It's interesting. There was this. I got to get going soon, but I will tell you about this other thing. After the booster dose campaign, or towards the end of the booster dose campaign in Israel, which started in August, the Ministry of Health in Israel did a survey of people who had gotten the booster 3 to 4 weeks earlier. And the survey was about adverse events, right? So what's great about this is it's not voluntary reporting. It's an actual survey of people, and there can be biases, and it's it's only 2,000 people. It's not bad for like an opinion survey, but if these are rare events, then 2,000 people isn't much. But then if you look at what they found, they found 11 people out of 2,000 had experienced Bell's palsy since they got the booster, right? That's a lot. If you start to do the math and you think how many millions of people got the booster, you're talking about 5,000 cases of Bell's palsy for every million boosters. And then you get, they have other things that they asked about, like people having seizures and shingles outbreaks and all kinds of stuff. And so I did now they've only released a report on that, and they didn't even put it on their website. They released it kind of quietly on their Telegram channel, and there were a couple of newspaper articles about it saying that it just showed that most of the adverse events were mild and transient, which is technically true, but if 51% of your adverse events are mild and transient and 49% are, you die, well, so it's technically true, but it's sort of missing the point, right? But so they're just these off the charts kind of like rates of all these serious adverse events, and there are other things, like most of them happen within a week of getting the booster, right? So if it was just something that happened that was just coincidental, you would expect it to be kind of evenly spread out over that time period, but it isn't. So that's an indication that a lot of this is really being caused by the vaccine. And there's a bunch of other stuff I wrote about that. I have a Substack. It's jackanapes substack.com. But one of the interesting things, so Israel does have its own kind of VAERS system that they started basically with this vaccine, and it's serious. Not only is it seriously underreported because nobody knows about it, and all the doctors are hesitant to report to it. But also because for a variety of reasons, but they also take out reports if they think that it has no possible relation to the vaccine, they'll just take it out. And so when they produce their reports, it's not publicly available. They produce reports from it, so all you have to go on are the reports. But it's severely underaccounted. So you can compare the rates of all these different adverse events that they found in this survey. You can compare that to the official reports, right? So in mid-September, representatives of the Ministry of Health stood in front of the FDA advisory committee that was considering approving the booster, and they said, "This thing is amazing. We've had all this effectiveness, and look, the safety is amazing. We had some adverse events, but we've only had 19 serious adverse events." Okay, and then you can make a comparison about for some of the adverse events that they reported. You can compare what were they reporting versus what were they getting from this survey, and you see that they're underreporting by hundreds, thousands, even 10,000s of times, depending on the adverse event that you're looking at. So it was just absurd the way in which they tried to use the data. I was so upset because when they first went in front of the FDA committee said, "Well, we don't think there's enough data here to approve the booster." And this was amazing that they did this, but they said, "We don't think there's enough information here yet to approve the booster for under 60-year-olds." So that they first approved it for over 60s, and then basically they said, "But so we're going to wait for more data on the younger group." And where were they going to get that data on the younger group? They were going to get it from Israel, because Israel said they started clamping down on the Green Pass at that time, and it was the first country and the only in the world where you had to have a booster in order to, if you had been vaccinated more than 6 months earlier, you had to have a booster in order to have a valid Green Pass. And furthermore, they were putting tremendous pressure on kids in the army, right? You have a mandatory army service in Israel, so they have all these these young adults, 18 to 21 years old, in the army, and they were like harassing them. They were treating them, the ones that didn't want to get vaccinated were just being treated horribly. But at least it gave them enough data, and they were able to go back to the FDA a month later, and the FDA approved the booster for younger age groups on the basis of this, this data from Israel that was forced on the Israeli people. I mean, it's just so shockingly shameful and just so against, I'll tell you a story, okay? When they first introduced the Green Pass in Israel, this was in February, March of 2021. I'm a college professor, and the students were required to be vaccinated or they were required to have a Green Pass to get onto campus. Now, what did that mean? They either had to be vaccinated or they had to have a recent PCR test, okay? Which was like kind of the saving grace of the system. That at least if you didn't want to get vaccinated, you could just get tested all the time and still kind of maintain a life. But I'm on the ethics committee at the university. I had the ethics committee in the Criminology Institute, research ethics. And this is just so completely against, research ethics. This was the time when Pfizer CEO was saying Israel is our lab. The prime minister and all the media were saying we're the world's laboratory and stuff like that. Well, if we're the world's laboratory, that means this is an experiment. And if this is an experiment, you cannot apply a single drop, not a single drop of pressure of any kind on anybody to take part in your experiment. And if you also have to give them complete informed consent. So they're not giving any informed consent, and they're putting enormous amounts of pressure on people. And I told my class this. I have this introductory class, and I said, look, what's the history of this? The history of this goes back to the Holocaust. It goes in the Nuremberg Code and everything that came out of that. And so I think this is just completely unethical what they're doing. And then I showed them some statistics on adverse events. I said, we don't know if any of this is actually related, but you're not seeing any of this in the news, are you? By the time I got back to my office after teaching that class, I had an email from the rector of the university written to my department chair and the dean. I was CC'd saying, I've received a complaint that Josh was inciting against the vaccines and comparing the vaccine drive to the Holocaust. Can you please investigate? Okay, so there was an investigation launched against me for pointing out the basics of
for teaching history lesson.
Now,
yes.
Fortunately, the class was recorded because they were kind of doing this hybrid teaching thing. So I guess they couldn't go in without my permission to look at the video. But I told my department chair, I said, here's the link. Look at it. I didn't say what he thinks what I'm being charged with. And it may have been that there was a misunderstanding. My Hebrew's not great or whatever. But and eventually it turned out, nothing came of it. But still, it was chilling. It kind of put me on notice that I had to kind of like, be careful about what I was saying.
But if people hear a snippet of something that they don't agree with, they will spin it in their head into their own interpretation, regardless of how good your Hebrew is. And it was into what that they heard.
And
right?
And it, the thing that people forget about East, Western Europe and World War II is, what was it, 1931 were the first anti-Jewish laws, and and the war didn't start till 39, and the death camps weren't really rolling until like 40 and 41. So I mean, it's a 10-year gap from when you start. I mean, and those were racially motivated,
right?
Anti-religious laws. I mean, they were, we are taxing Jews at a different rate. We are taking their property, et cetera, et cetera. And it was 10 years. It wasn't 10 minutes. Right. It wasn't 6 months. Right. It was 10 years.
Right. And, people, people forget, or they don't know, many people, even in Israel, and they learn a lot about the Holocaust in high school, that, one of the key things about that was kind of one of the key levers of incitement against the Jews was that they were disease carriers. They were the cause of the typhoid outbreak, and that was the justification for putting them in ghettos and stuff like that. And the entire German, the Germans were scientifically, the top of the world at that point. Basically the entire scientific and medical establishment were cheerleading that, and
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do? Quote, question science, right? So
Imagine that.
it's yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the fact that Israel is just the Israelis are just so blind to this, it just boggles. And even, I mean, really smart ones, like I'm in sociology, and we're kind of critical thinkers, and we're supposed to be empathic and stuff like that. And I don't know a single sociologist in Israel who's questioned this. I hardly know any academics, in fact, who have questioned this, which is very disappointing. And as I'm sure you guys can,
Wow.
I'm sure there are very few doctors that have really questioned this the way that you have.
So. Well, the good news
correct.
is apparently to start a movement, you only need 3.5% of your population. And I think we're hopefully getting close to that. Oh boy.
So now I'm depressed, but let's have some hope that, like we said, cracks will continue to, cause weakness in places that it should, that the truth can kind of crumble down where it needs to.
We just can't give up. We got to keep fighting. Whatever we're doing, everybody's doing something different, and we just got to keep it up.
Right.
And not give up. I mean, like you said, there are just issues that transcend partisan lines, and I become a single issue monomaniacal, really, in my focus of what I'm doing and thinking and working on. And it's the defining issue of our day. And there are a lot of big issues going on in the world right now, but this is it. I mean, this is absolutely 100%. You know what we were talking earlier about, the big lie and the stuff, and the deaths, and how, who's a murderer and who's a god and stuff like that. There's another one, which is, we're in the midst of a pandemic, which is, there are a lot of deaths, at least attributed to the pandemic, to this virus. Where's a good place to hide a dead body? In a pile of dead bodies.
Right.
So
I'm going to say,
because every time you want to say that something's due to the vaccine, they say, no, it's due to the virus. And then, okay, we need better data if we want to counter that type of argumentation. Anyway, it's easy to kind of sweep all of these dead bodies under the rug because of the virus. And, I'm sure you guys have talked in other shows about the similarities between the vaccine and the virus and stuff like that.
Yes. It's just changing blame. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
Look, I've kind of got to get going here. It's late over here.
Yeah, no problem. We could talk to you all day.
Yeah, me too.
Or all night in his, or all night in his,
as the case may be.
Yeah.
Me too.
Thank you so much, Josh. This was truly informative and very, very fun. And sometimes depressing.
Yeah.
I might add.
Yeah.
But again, I think great information. Just being able to piece through what signals of harm look like, and and then kind of the what we've all unfortunately learned, the malfeasance on the side of regulators, which is just disappointing to say the least.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for all the work that you've been doing and the risks that you've taken, and thank you for having me on.
You bet. Outstanding.
Well, I think we're both speechless after that interview. We're sitting here looking at each other at a loss for words. I don't know that we really need much of a summary of that. I think that was pretty self-explanatory.
Well, there's a couple things that really struck me. First of all, there's professors that do research and there's professors that teach. Josh is obviously a professor that can teach, because his ability to explain how they looked for signals of harm was, I thought, excellent, very erudite, just outstanding.
I think he taught that to all of us really well and got that point across.
And the other thing is, he lives literally on the other side of the world, was raised here, and politically we have probably never ever voted for anyone that he or his family has, and that I love that, because
you mean it's a total bipartisan joint effort on
because it isn't
into.
Because he's, and he said this, he's like, I'm a single issue person now, like this whole potentially harming people with mandated medical with a medical therapy is just so completely insane that has to be fought at all costs, and that has kind of become his, mission, so to speak. And so I think that's super powerful, and I think dominoes are starting to fall. It's going to be really fascinating to see what happens in the next 1 to 2 years. Things are probably going to change politically in the United States, which who knows what kind of witch hunts may or may not happen. I think legally, just this week, the Los Angeles Unified School District said that parents can sue the school district for harm because they had no right to mandate a vaccine to children to get them into school.
So, who's next, right? Workers, healthcare workers? I mean, maybe.
Right. Well, but that's
going to continue.
But that's the point. It's going to be little cracks in the dam. And, LA Unified School District is like, I haven't looked this up, but I mean, that's huge, right? Like that's potentially, tens of millions of dollars in settlements being paid out.
Right.
And once.
To his point, though, that, I mean, if people all over the world are just kind of starting to question and research this and look at the data, request the information and challenge it, then, I mean, who knows what will end up happening and start unraveling. I mean, it just takes enough people pulling the threads from different sides to just dismantle.
Well,
and get to the truth of really what's been going on.
Right, but here's the point. If you really believe that the vaccines were the greatest idea in the world and that they've been really effective and they've saved millions of people, then have open debate and open discussion with people that disagree with you, and then you'll convince everyone in the middle that you're right.
Right.
If you run away and you censor them, all you're doing is convincing everyone that you're full of crap and you're running away from the fight. Engage the fight. That's this is that it's classic 8th grade bully stuff, right?
Yeah.
How do you defeat a bully? You punch him in the face, and then they don't bully you anymore. And that's what's happening now. It's like, they're trying to censure Peter McCullough through the American Board of Internal Medicine and take his board certification away. Why? Because he was harming patients? No, because it's COVID disinformation. Well, COVID disinformation according to who? According to the CDC, not according to doctors that actually see patients. So it's an entirely circular argument. I say that you're a stupid poop head, and stupid poop heads can't be board certified. And you go, well, why can't stupid poop heads be board certified? Because I said you're a stupid poop head, and around this circle we go. It's a merry-go-round of bullshit. It's unreal.
So, like junior high, that it drives me nuts. And you're right. Just circular arguments is what I'm
like, seriously, if you work for the CDC or the FDA, you should be, and assuming you totally believe the argument, the recommendations you're making, then you should be freaking out and doing whatever you can to not censor people, but to bring confidence back to your institution.
Oh, you think?
And you don't bring, I mean, like, I don't understand, like, these idiots in politics, they never understand, right? It's never Bill Clinton getting a blowjob in the Oval Office that's the problem. It's the cover-up. It's never the crime. Mm-hmm. So stop covering it up and expose what's going on and save your institutions, because we need you. Okay? It's not the, I never had sex with that woman. No. It's the apology. When did Clinton really recover from that? When he apologized. I lied, and he apologized, and people go, "Yeah, I lied too, so it's okay." But it's always this stupid, like Watergate would have been nothing if they would have said, "Yeah, we had these rogue actors that broke into the Democratic National Committee meeting, and we shouldn't have done that." And you distance the president and all these people from him. You don't cover it up, and the cover-up tells you how guilty you are. Never cover it up. Come clean. And they aren't. It's just like, just believe me, I'm the science. No, show me the data. Well, I am the data. Like really? Like, normal people get it. The uptake of the new vaccine, or, the new vaccine dose for the kids 6 months to 5 years is like basically no one's doing it, which tells you everything you need to know. People are sick of being lied to, and they know the regulators are full of crap.
Perfectly said, perfectly summarized. And before your blood pressure starts going up more, I'm going to pull the plug on this and wrap it up. But thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. On a more positive note, check us out on our Instagram and Facebook posts that I throw out there occasionally. We've been getting emails from you, which we really appreciate, and we try to get back to as quick as we can. So keep sending those, and send us your ideas for topics, or otherwise you get to listen to what we pick. So have a good one. We'll see you next week.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.